Welcome to Accounting for Manufacturing Overhead. By the end of this ACLET, you should be able to recognize the steps required to account for manufacturing overhead costs. Accounting for manufacturing overhead costs is not as straightforward as accounting for direct materials or direct labor for several reasons. One of the most challenging factors in accounting for manufacturing overhead is timing. Unfortunately, when you need information and when you get the information are two different things. So you'll find that you have to record estimated amounts first, then adjust to actual amounts later. In this ACLET, we'll walk through a timeline of the steps required to account for manufacturing overhead. In a separate ACLET, we'll work a set of numbers through the steps. Since timing is critical in accounting for manufacturing overhead, we'll need to distinguish between the period for which we're accounting for manufacturing overhead and the period in which we actually perform a required step. And so that you don't have to listen to me keep saying the period for which we're accounting for manufacturing overhead, let's substitute the year we care about. And to make it even simpler, let's assume that for purposes of this ACLET, the year we care about is 2019. Because timing is critical, we'll use a column where we'll indicate when each step is performed, then a column for the procedure involved. The first step, then, to account for 2019 manufacturing overhead will be done towards the end of 2018. In December of 2018, we will estimate what our total manufacturing overhead cost will be for 2019. As you might suspect, a common way of estimating next year's costs is to start with this year's actual costs and tweak them for things that you think will change next year. Step 2 also happens before we even get to the year we care about, 2019. In December of 2018, we need to choose a cost basis, sometimes called a cost driver. This will be something that we can measure easily and that is closely related to our manufacturing overhead costs. Common cost bases are direct labor hours. If the higher the direct labor hours, the higher the manufacturing overhead, or machine hours. If the more machines are operated, the higher the overhead, or sometimes direct labor costs, if overhead costs increase as direct labor costs increase. Step 3, again, is done before we get to the year we care about, 2019. So in December of 2018, we need to estimate the total number of units of the cost basis we expect to have in 2019. For example, if in step 2, we decided to use direct labor hours as our cost basis, then in step 3, we estimate how many direct labor hours we'll use in 2019. Step 4 is the last step that needs to be done before the start of the year we care about, 2019. So in December 2018, we calculate the manufacturing overhead allocation rate. To get the overhead allocation rate, take estimated manufacturing overhead cost from step 1 and divide by estimated number of units of basis from step 3. Our overhead allocation rate is based entirely on estimates, but we have no choice since we need the rate before we have actual data. Then, for the first time, we have a step that's actually done in the year that we're accounting for, 2019. Keep in mind that since step 5 is done in 2019, we have some actual data to work with now. So throughout 2019, as we finish a job and need to allocate manufacturing overhead to it, we'll use our overhead allocation rate from step 4, based on estimates, times the actual number of units of basis. In the Job Order Cost System ACLET, we allocated $200 of manufacturing overhead to job number 385. To illustrate, assume that our cost basis was direct labor hours. We would have calculated the $200 by multiplying our manufacturing overhead allocation rate by the actual number of direct labor hours used on job 385. The last step in accounting for manufacturing overhead takes place in the year after the one we care about, so in 2020. This is because we usually don't know what our actual costs are for a given month until the following month. Utilities are an easy example. All through December of 2019, we'd use electricity, but we won't know how much it cost us until we get the bill in January of 2020. So step 6 can only be done after we have all the bills in for costs incurred in 2019. When we know all of our actual manufacturing costs for 2019, we make the adjusting entry to account for any over or under allocated manufacturing overhead, just as we did in the job order cost system ACLET. An example of how to use these 6 steps to account for manufacturing overhead is included in a separate ACLET. This concludes the ACLET, Accounting for Manufacturing Overhead.